Good morning. It's my great pleasure to be able to introduce our opening keynote speaker at the Charleston conference. She is Anja Smit. She's the university librarian at Utrecht University in the Netherlands. And I think Anja and I have known each other for probably at least 20 years or so. She's someone I admire a great deal. She's been active in the library environment for over 25 years. Professionally, she got her start, her first job at PICA, which is a library automation cooperative in the Netherlands. You might think of it as somewhat similar to OCLC in the US. She has served in a number of different roles: library director in 3 universities, IT account manager, consultant, and a member of many national and international boards of library consortia and cooperatives. The way a number of us in North America met her was that she spent 3 years in New England as a consultant to the former library network, Nelanet. And somewhere before that, she also served as a resident at Yale University Library, where I was working. And that was how we first met. Personally, Anja says she loves to travel, and she gets homesick for foreign places rather than being homesick for home. She limits her physical exercise, she says, preferably to dancing, and in her next life, she intends to be a ballerina, and if that doesn't work out, she will also be a librarian. She wants you all to know that she has not changed her haircut since 1978. And that is true. So for her presentation today, she is going to talk about the core mission of libraries, which she believes is to provide perpetual access to knowledge, as has been the case for many centuries. But in an open access world, the role of libraries with regard to providing access is changing, and it could be minimal. So if that's the case, who will ensure perpetual access to knowledge to future generations? I've known Anja to be always a little provocative, and so we are very, very happy to welcome her. She just flew over from the Netherlands last night to Charleston.
Thank you very much, Anne, for this introduction. And now you know everything you never wanted to know, probably. But in case you were wondering, thank you very much also for the organizing committee, Katina, Anne, and all the others, for inviting me to the Charleston conference. I've been here, I think, in my Nelanet days in 2006, probably. And ever since, I have loved the conference. I have never been back, but there's always staff from my library who went here, and they're here today too, so that's wonderful. Today, I would like to address a topic which is difficult, mostly around questions, maybe not so much answers yet, but let's talk about it. And I'd like to start with this wonderful picture, a lovely imaginary picture of what a library looked like in classical times. And since then, of course, libraries have changed somewhat. I'm not quite sure that a citizen of the Roman Empire, when he would walk into the Hunt Library, because this is the Hunt Library, as some of you might recognize it, if a Roman citizen would recognize this as a library. Probably not. Things have changed. Although I do think that in some other respects, if we had Roman citizens or librarians here in the room today, I think we could have a very useful conversation, because it's also true that some things have not changed in 2,000 years, I think, and that is our core mission. Libraries have always worked for what I sometimes say jokingly, eternity. We work for the long term, we work for future generations, and I think that was always the case. This was already the mission of libraries in Ephesus, Alexandria, and it is still true today. Of course, today we live in the digital revolution. These are disruptive times for libraries. The internet, the space that we live in today, I think is the perfect environment to advance access to knowledge. So, of course, libraries were there from the start of the digital age to identify opportunities and to embrace technology, to provide better services to our users. Of course we do that, and we do that wholeheartedly. At the same time, I think it's also necessary that we acknowledge that in these disruptive times, things change to the extent to where other players on the internet are providing services to our users that we might not be able to do. So some of these new elements of the world replace library services, probably, or maybe. In any case, it is crucial that we libraries and publishers critically review where our added value lies exactly. And we need to do that continuously. 2 years ago, my colleague Koen Wilders, who is also in the audience today, addressed this conference on the topic of local discovery. It is our vision in Utrecht that we want to serve our users wherever they are in the digital network, to provide access to knowledge within their workflows as seamless as possible. So let's take a look at the workflows. And this may look very familiar to you. This is a picture of the traffic to content of JSTOR and Springer Nature. And this is the road our users use to get there. And if you think, well, this is only Utrecht, this is this small spot on the earth somewhere, I'm afraid that we have other indications of this is true, and maybe the percentage of the usage of Google Scholar in particular is even higher. We have indications of that. The road to access, both to electronic journals and to e-books, goes through Google and Google Scholar. So this is something that shows us what the workflows are. Another example. 2 colleagues of my library, Jeroen Bosman and Bianca Kramer, did a survey among researchers on what tools they use on the internet for their scholarly work. And this is the slide that shows you what they use to discover scholarly content. And again, Google Scholar is at the top of the list. Let's take a look at other tools. And where the red arrow is, that is the market share of the library tools, if you will. So this shows us how small, for some areas, the role of the library is in the workflows of our users, where the elements have to do with scholarly content. So our strategy at Utrecht is invest less in discovery of scholarly communication, of scholarly output, but rather focus on delivery of the content, providing access, and then do that through the systems that our users prefer, and not buy our tools ourselves. So no local discovery. So this might be one area to look at. Today, of course, users still need libraries for the most part to get access, to really read the information and all the scholarly output. Today, libraries are needed to provide access. But what about tomorrow? What if open access becomes the publication model of the future? What if Google does digitize all the world's books? What about if our users organize access themselves? The Max Planck Institute earlier this summer made a very compelling case to say, we need to organize things, otherwise our users will do it themselves. So will open access become the publishing model of the future? Some think it will. In any case, you might have heard of that in the UK and in the Netherlands. It is on the agenda of our governments and also of our universities. Since 2015 in the Netherlands, license negotiations between the universities and the publishers have included demands for open access. So far, we are focusing on the publishers that you can see in the slide. 8 large publishers, those are the ones we talk with on this topic. So far, there are 6 contracts that provide access to the content as before, but also provide open access to Dutch researchers' output. And that is around 2% of the world production. So 6 contracts with open access. In 2 licenses, in 2 of those contracts, the cost model is also flipped. So now we pay for the services that the publishers provide for publishing. We do not pay for the reading rights anymore. And here's the interesting thing. We took a step forward in making research output from the Netherlands open for the whole world, discoverable and deliverable. Wonderful. However, what happened was, in that discussion, the case was raised where it was said, well, the communities, by way of their universities, are now not paying for reading anymore. They're not paying for access. So we cannot talk about perpetual access either. It's not on the agenda. And when I was personally confronted with this during one of the discussions with a publisher, I found it hard to make the effective case for eternity, as you could say. How to do that? Some of my colleagues put together some statistics to demonstrate that older materials are used, and that because of that, in our new license contract, the new content should also be preserved and accessible for future use. Well, I must tell you, I didn't do a very good job. In the negotiations, the universities, our presidents, our vice chancellors are in the lead. And it was not on the top of the agenda. So now we will have a contract that says content for Dutch researchers is open for the world. The Dutch universities have reading rights, but there's nothing, it states nothing about how long this content will be open, and we don't even know how long it will be preserved. So that's not good. We take a step forward, and the world becomes more open, and at the same time, we take a step back. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is not new at all. This is an old problem. This is old news, and of course it is. We all have been aware from the start of digital publishing that there's all these issues, and we are working on solutions. We've been doing that probably for 20 years already. But what is the result? These are the solutions that we have available today, more or less. Dark archives cannot be used for access. Preprint repositories of different players with different lifetimes. They come up and they die. Archives where if push comes to shove, we have a pile of CDs and that's it. We have tried to look into one of the cases over the last year and to say, well, what if we don't have a license anymore? What about the archives? And this was the answer. Archival rights based on goodwill, basically. Unclear post-cancellation agreements. I'm sure many of you will recognize this. We do write reports on things like evolving collections. What does it mean? We're working on copyright all around the world. In different areas, some steps are taken, especially when it comes to copyright for the author. So the author is free to do with the publication what he or she wants. Very important. And then the last one is a very new one, and it's about rolling back files. So, what are we to do? We all know this, but then it's the elephant in the room, maybe. Well, there are promising initiatives too. As I said, we've been working on this for 20 years, national libraries, collaboratives, groups of researchers, other players, of course, publishers too. Some operate by themselves, others work with other partners. The National Library in my own country has an electronic repository that's been around since the 90s, but it's a dark archive. So it's of no use when you have cancelled a contract. I'd like to point to an initiative in France. Is there anybody here from France? Well, we should be proud of the French, because what they do is build a repository that includes also access. I think that is an interesting example, and I'm not sure of the exact planning. But I think that's a step forward, and I'm sure there's many more such initiatives. The question, though, is, what scale do we need to organize things like this? Of course, we are dependent, everybody is dependent on funding that is mostly local. The United Nations up to now do not have a program. So it's bound to be local, regional, national, and national is really, in some cases, of course, very, very local. What should we do? I always have this vision, you know, in terms of archiving, we need just a few hubs that live, redundant hubs that live in the world. But that is sort of a dream that is not really realistic. In theory, this is what we need, but how do we get there? Probably by developing our local initiatives and making sure that we use standards to be able to link the content. The internet will probably do the rest in terms of discovery. But the initiative to preserve the materials has to come from us, from the organizations that work with the content. And there's another huge question, of course. Who are the stakeholders? And if it's going to be a landscape with local and regional initiatives that are linked, how do we serve a population of readers and creators that live in a global world, in a global network, global collaboration? Not easy. So who should do the work here? First of all, of course, libraries do not own the digital content. It's not on our shelves anymore. We could, of course, collect it. And I must say, I never believed in that so much, that academic libraries could collect the research output of the institution. We've always done the reverse. We collected what our community needs. But maybe we start to do the other thing and collect the output of our researchers. Because in theory, if we all do that, we have this global network of repositories for scholarly information, right? It's not so easy. We have to have copyright that enables the authors, at least, to do with their results what they want. So it's not easy at all. The other thing, I think, what the case of open access to publication shows us, and has shown us over the last decade or so, is that we libraries are able to put things on the agenda of other stakeholders. The example, of course, is what I said, that now in the Netherlands and the UK at least, and also in other countries, open access and especially open science is on the agenda of politicians and of governments and other stakeholders. So that is another road that is very, very important. It's all about the agenda. If open science is something that the world is now embracing, this creates a huge opportunity for us. But first, of course, we have to get the elephant out of the room. So this is the first step we should do. We should focus on our own agendas, on the things that we really add value to society. Be critical about the things that others can do, but be very focused on areas where we provide the added value. And this, to my mind, is one of those topics. Access to knowledge, perpetual access, should be on the top of our agenda. That is the first step. Then, of course, we need to get it on the agenda of other stakeholders, collectively. And again, certainly, in a world where open science is on the agenda of our institutions, of researchers, because they need it for their work, for governments and politicians and policymakers, that's something we have proven that we can do. Put things on others' agendas. And then just find partners and go do it. Focus on tomorrow and leave today maybe a little bit more. Well, let's leave the rest to Google. Thank you very much.
So, excuse me, last month, both Anja and I had the opportunity to attend the ICALC fall meeting in Amsterdam, International Coalition of Library Consortia. And the opening keynote there was by one of the Dutch presidents or chancellors, whatever they're called there, but the leader who was leading the discussions with all of the publishers. And it was very, very clear from those presentations that the priority for the Dutch administrators, and perhaps the government, I'm not sure, was open access and cost containment. And that in order to achieve that, they seemed to be willing to put aside all kinds of other items. For example, a number of publishers who are moving excuse me, from perpetual access to rolling back files, after which there is no more access. After the meeting, I wrote to a handful of my consortial friends and I said, I'm not sure if we have to make that kind of choice, but if you had to make the choice between open access, cost containment, and perpetual assured access, with some responsibility to libraries in that, which would you choose? And you'll be very pleased to know that a whole bunch of my colleagues said that is a no contest. The perpetual access and the role of libraries would, for us, trump in this case. I think that's a very provocative kind of question because I don't know if there would be agreement in this room about it. But anyway, those are the kind of questions I think that are raised in the current negotiations and that Anja has raised here. What is really our primary responsibility, and how are we going to go about meeting it? So we now have about 10 or more minutes for comments, questions, answers. Welcome from the audience. There are microphones somewhere, right? All right, so if you have a question for Anja or a comment, please step up to a microphone, give us your name and institution, and go for it. Somebody?
I'm going to ask a question so people can spend time coming forward with their questions. And there are 2 microphones up there somewhere. Is that a person standing at a microphone up there? No. Anyhow, my question to Anja is about the Dutch presidency of the EU and the Dutch proposals connected with gold open access, which of course for the UK, where I come from, it is really interesting. Now, what do you think about the policies of the Dutch government in this area, and how would you relate it to the, if you read the stuff, Pay It Forward stuff from the University of California project, maybe you could relate it to the US scene, yeah? That's a nasty one, isn't it?
How could I ever compare a country like this small on the world to the United States? I think the relationship is that we're all trying to find ways and different solutions, and we're trying to find a way to further and advance access to knowledge. That is our common goal. We're very similar in that. And there's different ways. There's this golden route that the UK embarked on today, from what I understand, but there might be people in the audience who know much more about that. The green route becomes more and more prominent because maybe it's easier, maybe it's more effective cost-wise, efficient with the costs, etc. The point is that this is such a complicated issue that all the stakeholders have to work together to do this. And in the more recent initiative that you talk about, of course, it's one element that is taken out. What is crucial, I think, is how researchers go about their business and how the assessment of research is changed. If that is not addressed, it's very difficult to move forward. So this is a beast with many angles and many issues. Golden route, as we have seen in the negotiations in the Netherlands over the past year, cannot be the only answer, because now it poses these awful questions. Do you want to be open today and unsure about tomorrow, or go the way we always walked? So there's no easy answers here.
Hi, I'm Stephen Rintut with Alexander Street Press. Your presentation seemed to focus a lot on journals and books, and yet when I wind the clock back 60 years, the tragedy of libraries for me is not that we didn't preserve journals and books. We seem to have done a pretty good job on that. But music and video, I mean, we lost vast swathes of important feature films. And when I wind the clock forward today, the big concern for me doesn't really seem to be as much, whether Scientific American or Nature will be available in the future, as much as vast swathes of important emails are being destroyed. Corporations that really influence the future, their histories are being discarded every day. And I wondered, I very much like your idea of libraries as the center of preservation, but I wonder if you could talk about extending that mission beyond books and journals.
You're absolutely right. The problem is much bigger than I have addressed in these 20 minutes. I have focused on what I always call documented knowledge, because that is at the core of academic libraries, and that is mostly about written text not solely, but you're absolutely right. In the other areas, the problems are much bigger even. So I absolutely agree with you. I'm afraid that that is such a huge area that I would not presume to have any ideas or solutions on that. And that's because that covers also areas as archiving and all of that. So you're absolutely right. There will be, I'm sure, different solutions for the different types of information. Last year, I was in a scenario planning exercise of the National Archive of the country. And there was such an interesting discussion. There were stakeholders from different areas, IT, government, genealogists, and so on. And there was a big discussion where one party would say, well, this is the digital era. We can now save everything. We don't need a selection. And there were others who said, well, we do need to select. And that maybe that is the first step that you want to take. Provide criteria so that you somehow limit the playing field to a sort of a workable area.
Good morning, and thank you. My name is Jacob Nadal from RECAP, and as a consortium director, I hope I can ask this question without seeming purely self-interested. You mentioned a number of essentially third-party organizations in your talk that were providing this perpetual stewardship role, and I'd love to hear you say a little more, if I can elicit your thoughts on whether that's merely a useful governance structure or whether that's an essential part of the landscape you're trying to create, and if so, what do we do to make that as healthy as we can?
I think collaboration is key here. It would be a bit too bold, maybe, to state that we libraries cannot do this by ourselves, although I am inclined to say that. Where you see successful initiatives, like the one in France, it is something where larger IT organizations like INIST, which is started as a computer center. It's the IT organization for higher education in the country. And it plays a major role because, of course, it's about storage, but it's also about knowledge of how to preserve and also convert digital content. So organizations that do that, and some of those, and I'm not sure, to be honest, how that is organized in the US, on what level or what type of parties there are, but I think that collaboration with parties like that, with the owners of the content, with the publishers, with users, with researchers, and libraries is crucial. It has to be a multi-party operation. That's also why it's so crucial that this topic is not something that just only we discuss, and my point is that we should, that's the first step, but it's also crucial to put it on agenda of other parties.
You never actually defined knowledge except that sorry, Melissa Belvadi from the University of Prince Edward Island. You never defined knowledge, although you came a little closer in the answer to your first question about documented knowledge. But one of the pressures on academic libraries of all sizes right now is to get heavily into the business of curating and preserving faculty raw research data. And in my own institution, I'm seeing that new mission actually taking resources away because cost containment, it is a fixed pot, away from the traditional collection, preservation, and building components of our mission. And I'm wondering what you think of that, as whether you include that when you talk about the long-term preservation of knowledge.
A very to-the-point question. I didn't specify it because there was only 20 minutes. But of course, and we libraries have always been, again, about documented knowledge, books and journals, very traditional. Still, it's a very large part of what we do. Of course, now we see a focus within open science on research data. Some people say that this will become the new knowledge, that everything that is a result of research will, over time, be more represented by the data than by the publications. I don't know where it goes. What I do see is that we librarians have knowledge and competencies that are crucial for researchers to help them manage their research data. So I think more of a consultancy role. The storage and things like that, let the IT people do that. They shouldn't be on our shelves. It's not our competency so much, I think, to really store research data. But I do think we have a consultancy role to play. And to be honest, I also think that we could spend maybe less on collection development and use that time that we save there to help researchers manage their research data. Now, don't throw stones.
My name is Autumn Bennett. I am a Master of Science in Library Information Science graduate candidate at Syracuse University. You mentioned Google a few times in your presentation, and perhaps this was more of an offhanded comment at the end. But I do have a question, because it's only a matter of time before a service like Google does become privatized, especially since they have only indexed such a small portion of the web, specifically the dark web. There's still millions of more web pages that Google does not even have indexed, that we as librarians and information professionals are supposed to help guide our users to. So thinking about even the further future, probably not so distant, what do you see when we have a service like Google that we're actually going to have to pay for?
Oh, well. We don't know, of course. We don't know where it goes. My feeling is that it doesn't help if we keep pointing people to a local catalog. That won't solve the problem that you address. And I think what you address is very, it's true, it's absolutely true. Our users use it, and we should help them, exactly what you say, to help them find the things that are not easy to find. Again, more of a consultancy role, more of an advising role than being a gateway to knowledge, the way we used to be before. So that's I think what our role can be, and that's what I would like to focus on if it comes to discovery. Thank you very much.
Yes, I see we've got more comments, but in the interest of schedule, can you talk to Anja afterwards, please, and join me in thanking her for this opening address?
Thank you.